call is now being recorded.
Welcome to the V2V podcast with Aurelius. I am Aurelius, and with me today is Jaycie Henderson, and she is a troubled teen facility survivor and a student at Tufts University. And today we're going to be talking to her about her experiences in this therapeutic boarding school and what it was like there, and what she learned while she was there, and how it affected her, and maybe we'll get to some solutions. I'm not sure. Welcome to the show, Jaycie.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be talking to you right now. A lot of people don't do any work around the troubled teen industry, so it's nice to have someone doing some kind of interviews and trying to get the word out.
Well, yeah, I noticed that, and that's kind of why I wanted to start doing these interviews, because I wasn't hearing a lot, at least kind of out in the public, regarding kind of what goes on behind the scenes in these places. And I want to really take the approach of being as objective as possible and trying not to prejudge or say that this is bad or this is good, but rather let the people who've experienced these places speak, freely for themselves and tell their stories. Before we kind of get into what you went through, can you kind of give me and the audience an idea of like basically what the troubled teen industry is, or the I know there's an organization, the Worldwide Association of Specialty Schools, there's wilderness camps. So can you kind of explain what we're talking about? Yeah.
So the troubled teen industry is sort of like an all-encompassing word used to describe wildernesses, therapeutic boarding schools, residential treatment centers that all aim at either providing mental health care to teenagers, making them more compliant, making kids listen to their parents. Some places practice gay conversion therapy. Other places, maybe if your kid's transgendered and you don't want them to be transgendered, certain places that you can send them to will give you the option of forcing them to live the gender that you wish them to be, stuff like that. The troubled teen industry also is some public teen treatment centers that are ran by the state. There's some of those that I would say would probably qualify as that. Even though it's not necessarily the same big corporate money, they still do some of the same tactics.
Or there are partnerships with the states and the private institutions, like private-public partnerships. So they might get some funding or take a particular insurance, or maybe take I know that each state regulates the facilities on their own terms. It's not there aren't federal guidelines, to my understanding. So
there's not.
Each state manages like that kind of public health on their own terms. Like, so it varies from state to state, like what kind of you're going to get. And then of course there's the international aspect too.
Yeah. So say you're in Massachusetts. I believe, this is what I was told by my therapist in Massachusetts, who's a psychologist, physical restraints outside of a hospital setting are illegal in Massachusetts. So there's hardly any residential treatment centers or therapeutic boarding schools there, because a lot of them, instead of training their staff better, they rely on physical restraints instead of getting proper facilities. It's just cheaper to hold down a kid instead of having the proper environment for them to be in with the proper trained staff. So Massachusetts doesn't necessarily have the same kind of problems, not saying that their mental hospitals for teens are very good, because I've heard stuff about some abuse going on there, but they don't necessarily attract this industry like states do, like Utah, North Carolina, Georgia, Missouri. Those states don't have those kinds of regulations.
There was an article about a young man who escaped from a facility in Utah last week, and he was 13. They defined him as a wayward youth. I imagine that means that he, I don't know if that means he like used to run away from home or things like that, but what happened is that he left across the desert with like a jug of water, and then they found him several hours later on the side of the road, hot, hungry, but safe. And the last line in this little article was that they were going to send him to a facility with better security, like that. And that seemed really kind of scary to me, but that was the ultimate solution, is like, because there was really nothing in the article about any kind of therapeutic value that this kid was getting. And the fact that he took such a risk to try to make his way across the Utah desert says something about where he escaped from. Like, what's going on there? I think there needs to be much more investigation. But it's difficult.
13-year-old kids don't just run across the desert.
Right. And I know there's some difficulty in getting good information from the outside, because in a lot of cases these are private institutions, and they have no obligation. They have no obligation to let anyone in. Like, those doors are closed. Like, there's not really you can't really make a public inquiry that's meaningful that will really get you good results, in my experience. They're just going to either say no or tell you that everything is fine. But when stuff like that happens, it just really makes you wonder what's going on, and that has a lot to do with why I decided to talk to people to find out, to kind of lift the veil on this whole thing and find out what's really going on. Because, these are kids, and they come back out into the world after having been through these programs, and they don't generally talk about it because when it's difficult, people don't understand. They don't necessarily even believe them, because some of these stories are so outrageous that it's hard to believe that, like you were saying, all the restraint tactics. It makes you wonder, like, what kind of behaviors are these kids exhibiting to even find the need to hold, restrain somebody and hold them down. Like, so I that's really interesting about, like, Massachusetts, and that's prohibited. So there's far less of these programs there. That's a really good point. It says a lot without really even trying. Like, they don't do that there, so therefore there aren't as many programs. It
would be more expensive.
Well, sure, because you'd actually have to apply real therapy to people. Right. It's really kind of mind-blowing that a place would want to take basically the easy way out when it comes to treating, young people with quote unquote problems in the most brutal or non-caring ways. Like, it's much more expensive to actually help people, I guess. Or at least the profit margin goes down. Right.
I agree.
So let's talk a little bit about kind of your particular experience, like, from however you want, like, what got you there and what was it like?
So when I was 14 years old, I was diagnosed with emerging borderline personality disorder at Menninger Clinic in Houston. They're top-notch, love the place, everyone's super nice there. I don't think they were aware of what went on at the place they sent me. They had someone from Menninger come and check up on the place because they'd sent several girls there. And the place put on a face when they were there. We had to clean everything for the guests coming in. We had to make sure the pillows were put on the couches in the right places. I think, I'm not 100% sure. I know for parents, they put food out and make it look like we have access to just food tables with fruit on them all the time, which was not true. So things would just look a lot nicer when we would have guests. We would have tours for parents, so we would all make sure everything was really clean. We didn't have a cleaning staff until I was there for about 7 months. It was just students who cleaned, and then they had a cleaning staff that would clean the school area and then the bathrooms after 7 months there. So, anyway, so I get sent there my first day from Menninger, and my parent had a transporter similar to the ones that kidnap kids at night, except mine didn't kidnap me at night. I was aware they were taking me. They came and picked me up from Menninger in the middle of the night, and I just thought that my mom didn't trust that I was going to run away because I didn't want to go to this place. So she has this lady transporting me. And when I was at Menninger, we used to make jokes about staff being next to you when you had to for safety reasons, and the staff would joke with you because it's a little awkward, right?
Right.
So my transporter says that if I leave 5 feet of her, she's going to physically restrain me. And that was whenever I thought something was a little up, because at Menninger, they couldn't touch you. They could not. And so that was my first red flag that something wasn't right, but then I thought it was just the transporter. So I started to get a little scared, and she told me, she's dropped kids off to this place before. It seems like a nice place. There's always laughter. So I started to feel a little bit more comfortable about it. We go through the whole airport thing. We get there. And when I first drive up, there's a bunch of girls playing out in the snow in the front. And, I've never seen snow at this point because I'm from Texas. So I get excited because I think I'm going to go, start playing with all these girls in the front in the snow. And so I get in, and the first thing I ask is, when can I go out into the snow? And my parent's there. She's in a back office, so I also asked if I could see my parent. And they said, no, that's not possible right now, that they were going to check me in. They were going to go through all my stuff. My transporter left, said goodbye to me. And so they start going through my things and just talking about some of the rules there. They had my big sister come up and introduce herself. She was 21 at the time. I was 15 going into the same center.
She was there too?
She was 21, which I didn't think that was legal. Now that I'm out, I don't believe that you can have someone 21 with 15-year-olds, but anyway. So she was my big sister. She told me all the rules about the place. They seemed a little odd, I couldn't call my parent. They were really strict about clothing. I think they might have had a rule about underwear. I don't 100% remember. There was something weird that was really personal written on there. And then they were like, okay, well, it's time to go say goodbye to your parent. They had me an arm's length of a staff member, which they did at Menninger, but I'd never had that happen to me because I wasn't a risk for suicide at the time. So I had to stay an arm's length of a staff member. So at Menninger, anytime I'd seen kids do that, I was 15, just turned 15. So I thought it was hilarious when they would run away and make the staff chase them. And the staff would do it at Menninger for a little bit. I mean, it wasn't a safety concern. So I have a staff member an arm's length of me, so I thought it'd be funny if I just walked to the other side of the room and was like, hey, you have to, keep up with me. She screamed at me, told me how I was being extremely unsafe, how they were going to put me on these precautions so I couldn't shower or use the bathroom alone.
Just from walking across the room?
Yeah, and she told me that
Wow.
I'd lost, like, all the trust, like, that I'd had when I first walked in, like, so then they put me on a 2-to-1 staff ratio, so I had 2 staff following me around. And so then I went and I said goodbye to my mom. I asked her, I said, I don't think this is the place, Mom. Something's really sketchy. Can you try a different place? Like blah, blah, blah. And they looked at her and they said, kids say this when they come here. And so I yelled at him and I was like, you stay out of it. Like, Mom, this is not the place. Like, please, can I go to the other one? Because Menninger had several places they suggested. This is the one I chose.
Okay.
Because when I spoke with them on the phone.
Right.
Well, I called them on the phone, and the first place I called said I would be watched when I showered when I first got there, and I was like, no, that's not going to happen.
No.
So I chose the place that said that wouldn't happen, and it did happen.
Okay.
So my parent leaves. I just remember sitting there just kind of in shock. I asked for my parent to be present when they made me take my clothes off, because at the hospital, my parent was present when they had me stripped down.
Right.
I thought that I had that right. And so they told me no, that they were my legal guardian, that I had to take all of my clothes off if I wanted to be able to, like, participate in anything. And so it took them a couple of hours, but finally, because I had some sexual trauma that I did not want to take my clothes off in front of these strangers that I didn't trust. And so they made me take my clothes off completely naked, and they searched through my clothes. I remember them, like, carefully inspecting my underwear. It's so humiliating. And I'd never had that happen at the 2 places I was at prior. At the other place I was at, they had me take my shoes off, they patted my clothes down, and checked my pocket. And, I mean, I didn't bring anything in. I didn't have a way to. So later that night, I'm sitting there. I just got really uncomfortable. I asked if I could call the police because they weren't allowing me to call my parent and tell her that they made me take my clothes off. So after a while, because I thought, you always have the right to call the police and have a police officer explain to you your rights, because I was 15 at the time. I didn't think anything of it. So I asked if I could call the police officer, have him come explain to me, like, what they can or can't do. And so they told me I wasn't allowed to do that. That was not going to happen. So I ran away from my staff and I found a wall phone, figured out the dial-out code for some reason, and tried to call 911. And as it was ringing, they kept hanging it up until eventually they cleared all the kids out. And then they shuffled me into a room and told me that if I didn't calm down, they were going to physically restrain me, which scared me because it was 4 big women telling me they were going to all sit on me. And then they issued me down to the basement in like a huddle. They like put me in the middle of all of them and put me in the basement, and I just felt defeated. I just remember like crying, feeling like, what is about to happen to me? This is horrible. I'm so scared right now. And that's whenever
this is your first night, right?
My
this
first
is still
night. First
night.
Yeah.
Right.
I hadn't even been there a full day.
No, like there's so much going on. Like that
all in one.
You might think that, this happened and then this happened, like, a week or 2 weeks. But this is all happening like immediately when you get there. Your mom leaves, and then you're in it. Like all this stuff, just like continuously, like one thing after another. You sound like, it sounds like you were really frightened. Like,
yeah, I was really scared.
That's the main impression that I'm getting, like, so far, is that this sounded really scary.
Yeah, it was. It was really scary. And I wasn't a very like dependent child on my parent at home. I was very independent. I was always out with friends, and I had not felt this much like a child until I was in this place. I felt helpless. I felt like I couldn't do things for myself.
Right. That's one of the things you were talking about, is that you learned what helplessness felt like.
Yeah, I learned what helplessness felt like. I learned shame. I learned what truly looking at yourself and feeling like you're disgusting is at Solstice. Yeah.
and paranoia, which makes sense.
Yeah, oh, yeah,
because,
paranoia.
Sure, because you don't. And I don't. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you were kind of learning, like, the parameters of what you could and couldn't do, kind of in real time. Like, you would make a move, and then you would be corrected. Like, so, of course, you feel paranoid because it sounds like you didn't necessarily know, like, what step to take next. Like, don't go left, go right. But you only found out that you're supposed to go right after you've gone left and were forced to turn right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. So, man, this is like, it's actually difficult to listen to, because I'm thinking, like, oh my gosh, this person is, like, just turning 15. She went from a place that, was, reasonable, and these people professionally cared about you, at Menninger. Like, they had, some compassion for you as a person.
Yeah.
But they couldn't necessarily give you the kind of attention that they said you needed. There, correct?
Yeah, that's what they said. They said they weren't built to house people for as long as they felt like I needed treatment.
Right. It'd be interesting to get, like, an appraisal of the treatment that you received there from Menninger's point of view. Like, if they really kind of knew, because they're not connected to these other facilities. So it makes me wonder if they, and other places that provide what would be closer to real help, really have a clear idea of what goes on. Because I think they would be opposed to it.
I don't believe Menninger knew. Yeah, I don't believe Menninger knew at all. I called them actually a while back trying to speak with someone to give some complaints about the place they sent me to as a kid, just to let them know, like, how it affects me still, because I had to go to therapy because of the place that I was put in.
Right.
I spent a year in therapy, like, just going over all the trauma from the place I was in. So my therapist said it would be a good idea and healthy for me to call Menninger and let them know. And they sort of listened to me a little bit, but I don't think they understand the amount of bad stuff that happens at these places and how many places they are. They never really got to, like, letting me tell my story. It was more of just, oh, well, like, we'll transfer you to talk to this person, we'll transfer you to talk to that person. And I don't think they understood how serious I was. So I will be trying to contact them some more. Hopefully
I get that.
More people will. I've been trying to encourage other people who were through Menninger and then were sent to treatment centers to call as well.
Right. That's part of the reason I want to get these, like, testimonies regarding what people have been through, because the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Like, one story from one person regarding one place.
Yeah.
To an administrator somewhere who might care, like, they really, care about the welfare of somebody, or to the state, or to whomever. It's just one voice telling one other person about what their experience, but many voices that aren't connected to each other, sharing very similar stories regarding what they've been through, and and their differences and their similarities, and it's all together I think we're much greater than as individuals. So that's really kind of the goal here, is to get a collection of these testimonials from people, so that the sheer weight of all of the experiences can be directed to people that can do something about it. And that's that isn't the kind of thing that happens overnight. But if we continue to be diligent and brave people like yourself will come forward and say, here's what happened to me in really clear terms. And you're not, it's not like you're, what I'm not hearing is a lot of personal judgment or saying that this person's a bad person.
Yeah.
These people, even the workers themselves, the staff.
Oh, they were victims.
They're caught up in this too. Certainly. So, and that's really important to me to keep it as straightforward and objective as possible, strictly about kind of what each person went through, so that over time, people are listening already. It's kind of amazing that the feedback that I'm getting from doing these interviews has been pretty fantastic. And a lot of, I think did you see this on Reddit?
Yeah, I did. And it was actually an ex-staff member of mine that showed me the Troubled Teens thread on Reddit when I reached out to him years later, talking about how, I just could not get over what happened there. And he said he couldn't either.
Yeah, I really want to do my best to find some parents to talk to, and some ex-staff as well, to fully round out the picture of what goes on in different states. Because I think I've spoken about a place in Samoa, Costa Rica, Massachusetts. I forget where else, but this is going on all the time, right under our noses, and we don't really know about it except the people that have been through it. So, is there anything else you really want to share? Or?
Sure. So the place that I was in, it didn't necessarily have staff who had any kind of mental health care background.
Okay.
One of the, I think, worst staff, meanest, everyone hated them, scariest. She was actually, comes to find out, an ex-prison worker in a men's prison, working in working in an all-girls, mental health care facility. So she was used to, and all her job experience was with violent male criminals.
Gotcha.
She worked giving them treatment on how to not rape people, pretty much. That's what she did.
Oh, my goodness.
She was acted like she was a no bullshit staff. She's like, oh, well, I'm no bullshit. I worked in a prison. I know when you guys are all trying to manipulate and all this. Well, I didn't find out till years after I got out that using the word manipulate to mentally ill people is actually not appropriate. They can't help what they're doing. You don't necessarily use the word manipulate anymore to describe someone with borderline, because that dehumanizes him. That makes them seem not like a person. They're coping the way that they know how to cope. And so we would constantly be told that we were being horrible, manipulating people. One of the worst parts of being there, we had a balcony whenever I was first there. I watched a friend jump off of the balcony when she got loose from staff. She wanted to jump off the balcony because she figured if her parents saw how unsafe the place was, they would let her go home. So, and she knew it wasn't tall enough to die. It was tall enough to break a leg. Well, she ended up breaking her spine.
Oh, wow.
She broke her spine. She got to go home, though, and she said that she was happier than ever with a broken spine sitting in her bed at home.
That's pretty incredible.
Yeah, and that was really traumatic to watch. I was team leader at the time, so she checked in with me and told me that's what she was planning. I told her, please don't, because that's really bad. You're going to hurt yourself. I went to take a shower, and she waited till I was in the shower, and when I walked out, I saw her go over.
Well, I just want to pause for a moment and kind of reiterate this. a girl that you knew disliked this place so much that she was willing to jump off a balcony, broke her spine, went home, and then reported that she was happier injured at home than she was at the facility. That's pretty incredible.
And one of the first things she said to me was, "It worked."
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, she was awesome. She was a bad bitch, but
that's I was gonna say maybe not in the same terms, but yeah, she's a bad bitch. Incredible. That's wow.
I had another friend. She had been in there when she first got there. She seemed pretty normal. This happened with a lot of people, and as they were there, things just got worse for them. They would start exhibiting behaviors that just they did not exhibit when they were first there. And I've seen these people outside of treatment, a lot of them, and they seem normal now. There's no weird behaviors, but people picked up a lot of weird behaviors in treatment. And so one of my friends who was completely fine, not suicidal before she got there, she was there for what their parents described as alcoholism. I'm not sure if they would or not. And so I think one of the worst days being there was just hearing her being restrained in the basement, screaming for about two hours, I'd say. The screaming went on. It was horrible. And I told the staff, I was like, why aren't we calling someone, police or something, to come get her out of here? And a staff member looked at me and they go, well, we're a certified mental health care facility, so we should be able to deal with this. And that was almost like laughable to me, that they were
right.
certified.
That's not really an answer, though. Sure. Well,
yeah.
That's an interesting answer because we're a certified mental health facility. We should be able to handle this. Well, I guess my first response would be, is that, well, obviously you're not.
Yeah.
Like if this isn't having a young lady screaming in the basement for 2 hours because of God knows what is going on down there,
right?
Isn't handling anything.
Mm-mm.
Like that's the opposite of handling something.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean, so those kinds of little statements are very telling.
Yeah.
You know, because sometimes those answers tell more of the story than you might expect. Like, well, we should be able to handle this.
Yeah.
And you would agree, saying, yeah, you should be able to.
Well, yeah, they should, but
right, but that doesn't sound like anything normal, or therapeutic, or helpful.
No.
Right.
I have another friend. We had these cleaning supplies that we would use to clean the doors. And, I don't think any of us had been thinking about drinking cleaning supplies. Like, I don't think that was on anyone's radar going in. But
generally speaking, it's not something that people think about. Yeah.
No, yeah. So while we were there, they made such a big deal about the cleaning supplies have to be locked up. You guys can't have access to them without staff. And so one day my friend broke, and while they were having her clean, she opened it and just chugged cleaning supplies because she knew that she was going to get out of there for that. Because there was a mental hospital in the town that some girls had gone to, and they actually allowed you to call parents. They allowed you to call your friends there. You could, they had snacks that you were allowed to get there. The food was better. You were allowed to wear makeup. You were allowed to fix your hair there. So girls would do stuff like
psychiatric hospitals are different. Right.
Yeah.
Like psychiatric hospitals they're hospitals for one thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And, that's a much different situation.
So girls would do stuff to get sent there. Yeah.
Sure. Right.
Girls would do stuff like drink bleach.
Right. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Drink cleaning supplies, Windex.
Yikes. Well, again, it's like one of those situations where people are doing whatever it takes to get out of there. And like we were saying, you can't really effectively run away because they'll just
it was so far
from
anything. Yeah. I had
a
friend run away for 2 weeks she stayed in a homeless encampment behind the Greyhound station in Asheville. And she came back, and I mean, her story of leaving was just, at the time, that was like everyone's little beacon of hope, was hearing about how she got away for 2 weeks. But she came back and she had STDs. She'd had to be sleeping with guys who were in their 20s to like have a place to stay. I mean, it was horrible. But for all of us, that sounded like the life compared to what we were dealing with. Another friend of mine, she ran away for the day, and they ended up just getting in a car with whoever they could get in a car with. And they had some creepy guy who said he was going to buy them alcohol. But that was better than being there.
Yeah, it seems like almost anything is better than being there.
Yeah, anything.
Wow. Well, that's incredible. Like, I mean, it's almost hard to find the words, like, to explain, like, what it's like there. But I think you've painted a really interesting picture, including yourself and others that you knew, about this one place in particular. But the interesting thing is that, you know, the first thing you said really was, well, it wasn't one of the worst places. Like, I've heard worse.
Yeah. It definitely wasn't one of the worst.
But everything following that was like really nightmarish.
Yeah, it was really nightmarish, but I would say, luckily, I hadn't heard of anyone being sexually abused there. No one, I don't believe anyone was denied food. I don't think that ever happened. I've heard of food denial. And we had a basement that kids were sent to. So if you were put on what was called safety, you would go sit in the basement. They still do this. I've actually talked to a girl recently who got out a year ago instead of my 3 years. They still have the basement. That's where you go when you're on safety and you have a staff stare at you. You're not allowed to talk. All you can do is sit there and think about what you've done or do your therapy assignment. But usually you're just sitting. I've heard of other places having rooms, small rooms, they would lock you in.
Right. Yeah, I was told by somebody recently that she was locked in a room for 3 weeks, like 24 hours a day. Like prisons aren't allowed to do that with prisoners.
No, especially minors. I don't think you're allowed to do that with minors at all.
Like but it happens. But even in adult prisons, like if someone's in solitary confinement or in isolation, they have to by law get out into the outside area for at least an hour a day. And what I was told is that you're right. What I was told, it was just continuous isolation in a little room, basically with food slipped through a slot in the door, kind of a situation.
Yeah, it wasn't quite like that. You would have a staff member down there. They weren't allowed to talk to you or really make eye contact, but you weren't physically alone. You were alone, but you weren't physically alone. And the basement wasn't like some dark, jank, scary basement. I mean, it had carpet and couches, but you were still underground and you weren't allowed to walk up the stairs or you'd be physically restrained. A lot of times people were physically restrained down there on safety for a long time. You couldn't go outside. The longest I've heard of someone being down there was 2 weeks at just not leaving the basement. But I believe there was a girl that was down there longer. I just don't want to say that if it's not true because I'm not 100% sure about her. Yeah. Right.
It's better to stick with what we know than because there's a lot of speculation and that can work the other way too. You're just making it's all speculative. You're making it up. Well, what about the good stuff? And you can get into that argument, and you definitely want to avoid that because it's counterproductive. Because
they made me do horse therapy, man. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no,
I just thought about horses.
Therapy. No, go ahead.
They had these abused horses, and they would make us stand in a field with them and try to connect with them, and it was it was the worst. It was my first week being there. I was so pissed off about being there, and they had me standing there with a horse. This horse doesn't want to talk to you. This horse wants to be left alone. I don't want to be there. I hate horses.
Right. I've heard of like drug treatment programs that do horse therapy like that, and
yeah.
I cannot understand that whatsoever. Like,
I don't.
Believe me, the horse is not going to get you to stop smoking crack or whatever it is that you're doing. Like, it's just not going to happen.
The horse, if anything, made me want to kill myself even more.
Well, I'm glad that you're still here with us, Jaycie, and I want to thank you for sharing some of this stuff. I know that it's pretty brutal, but it's always nice to kind of end on a laugh, because you know, there's like gallows humor involved. I understand that like in any situation, you know, you're going to naturally find those good moments, those happy, like funny moments. And you know, you in a field like having a stare down with a horse is pretty funny. So so thank you for coming on, and maybe you know, maybe in a couple of weeks we can do a follow up. Tell a little bit more, or get into some different areas. I'm not sure.
Maybe I can try to get some more survivors to talk to you from the same place, stuff like that.
Yeah, that would be cool. Like, because like I was saying, you know, the more voices we have, the better the chances, and that someone will listen. And that's all my agenda is. If I have an agenda, it's that I want to be able to provide a platform for people who've gone through these programs, to speak with with one voice. So somebody will maybe, hopefully, start paying attention. So thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
All right. Have a good day.
You too.